homeland. This right is indeed enshrined in UN Resolution 194 and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Nobody can change that or take it away. Israel's plan to annex parts of the West Bank only proves to the world that Israel is an apartheid state, that we must intensify our efforts to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, and that Palestinians deserve freedom, justice, and equality like everyone else. So, without further ado, I'll start off our amazing and comprehensive lineup of speakers by introducing my wonderful co host and friend, Zahia El Masri. Zahia was born as a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon. She is a member of BDS Quebec, VP of the Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec, advocate for social justice issues and housing. And she was a candidate for the NDP in the Ahunsik Cartierville riding in the Canadian federal elections of 2019. So welcome, Zaya. It's so good to see you today.
Likewise, Hamam, thank you so much for this introduction. I'm extremely humbled to be part of this wonderful group of people who will be speaking about the Nakba today and about commemorating Nakba. I would like to first begin by acknowledging that we are on the land which we gather on today is the traditional unceded territory of the indigenous people. And the recognition goes just not only with words, but it also has to be accompanied by concrete actions. So it's very important for us as Canadians, as Palestinians, as people living on this land to take this acknowledgement seriously and to accompany it with actions. The Nakba commemoration, as we know, it's something that we hold every year. This has been ongoing for over 72 years. And if you look right behind me, you will see the key. This symbolizes the Nakba. This is the actual key that my aunt Amal gave me. And this key belongs to the house of my grandparents, which is today located in Haifa. And this is something that we extremely hold on to. And the Nakba as well goes beyond symbolism and the request for recognition. It has to be accompanied as well by true action and concrete action and understanding that it is an ongoing Nakba. This is not an event that happened 70 years ago and then it just stopped. So with us today, we have an amazing group of people that will be speaking to this from Lebanon, from Al Khalil, from Hebron, from across Canada. And I'm extremely delighted just to introduce them one by one. But other kind of actions that we will be taking also, we have a petition that's been circulating and we have hundreds of signatures as well. And this petition, basically, you can go online, you will see the link right now. And it's asking the Canadian government to lift the siege on Gaza. With the COVID-19 crisis, this has just come to highlight the dire situation of Gaza. We are in an open air prison. So we're asking the Canadian government to lift the siege, to provide more medical help for Palestinians living in Gaza. And we also ask you to accompany us by using the hashtag Nakba72 in order to just bring to light what's happening in Palestine and the ongoing Nakba that the Palestinian people are going through. So it brings me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. And sorry. So I'm introducing actually Yafa Jarrar. She's a Palestinian lawyer and she's currently living in Ottawa and has been a prominent member of the BS community since 2005. She's also the daughter of Khalid al-Jarrar, who's an elected member of the Palestinian Legislative Council and is currently a political prisoner in Dammam Israeli prison. I've also had the pleasure of meeting Khalida in 2016 during my visit to Palestine, and she's just a courageous, powerful lady. So it's even more of an honor for me to be able to introduce her daughter, Yafa. Yafa.
Thank you, Zahia, and thank you everybody for inviting me to speak at this very important event today. First of all, I speak to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, also known as Ottawa, and I thank them for hosting me on their territory today. As we commemorate the 72nd year of Nakba, we must be reminded that Nakba is not a mere event that happened 72 years ago. Palestinians today continue to live in an ongoing Nakba. 72 years have passed since Palestinian people were forcibly expelled from their homes, lands, and property in Palestine during the Nakba, or the catastrophe, which started in 1948. The Palestinian society was devastated during the Nakba. 531 Palestinian villages were destroyed, while Zionist militias carried out more than 70 massacres in which more than 15,000 Palestinians were killed between 1947 and 49. Some 2/3 of Palestinian people became refugees in and around 1948, and a quarter of those who remained were internally displaced following the war, denied their right to return to their villages, towns, and cities of origin ever since. Yet the Nakba's colonial legacy lives on. At 72, the Nakba is far from a distant memory for the Palestinian people. It's an ongoing reality of Israeli settler colonialism, population transfer, apartheid, and dispossession, policies which have never ended and continue to be entrenched today. In turn, the 1950 Law of Return and the 1952 Citizenship Law cemented Israel's institutionalized racial discrimination in law, establishing domination both in law and in practice. Palestinian refugees have been categorically denied their right of return to their homes, lands, and property from which they were illegally dispossessed as mandated by international law. 72 years on, the Nakba has come to symbolize the ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people through Israel's racist colonial rule, implemented through an apartheid regime all over Palestine, which continues to be entrenched. The incarceration of Palestinian political prisoners is only one face of the continuation of Nakba. Today, we have around 5,000 Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli prisons. 43 of those prisoners are women, 183 are children under the age of 18, and 20 under the age of 16. 432 are detained under administrative detention without charge or trial and based on what Israel recognizes as secret evidence. My mother, Khalida Jarrar, a feminist, a human rights defender, an elected member of the Palestinian Legislative Council, and a member of the Higher National Committee responsible for following up on Palestine's accession to the International Criminal Court, is one of those prisoners today, incarcerated in a Damoun prison, as Zahia mentioned, since October 2019 without any charges. In early March of 2020, the Israeli Prison Service stopped and seized all family and lawyer visits to prisons, citing this as a COVID-19 precaution measure. All trial proceedings in Israeli military courts have been postponed, and Palestinians undergoing pre-trial detention or interrogation are no longer brought into court for their detention extensions, further deepening Israel's violation of their right to liberty and security of a person, as well as the right to a fair and speedy trial. Legal representatives have been barred from direct communication with Palestinian prisoners and have only been allowed phone calls with some of them. My mother, along with 2 other women prisoners, have been denied by security services even to make those phone calls based on secret evidence and security measures. We have not had any communication with my mother or any updates on her health since the situation started in March. On March 18, 2020, Damir's lawyers were informed that 4 Palestinian detainees under interrogation may have been exposed to COVID-19 transmitted by contact with Israeli worker at Tahtikva Interrogation Center who tested positive for COVID-19. Placing prisoners in quarantine means, and we must clarify, that means placing them in solitary confinement under appalling conditions and in complete isolation without even providing them with a change of clothes or any outdoor access. Prisoners who are not provided today with basic sanitary equipment or cleaning supplies that are essential to keep them protected during this global health pandemic. Just earlier this month, and as a punitive measure, completely and purely punitive measure to Palestinian prisoners and their families, Israel issued and implemented a military order to seize all bank accounts belonging to Palestinian prisoners. This means that thousands of political prisoners lost their monthly incomes that go through these accounts and any savings that they may have accumulated. Today, states must guarantee international justice and accountability by supporting a full and thorough investigation by the International Criminal Court into the situation in Palestine. The court is competent to investigate these crimes. On Nakba Day, we call on all civil society organizations and state representatives from around the world to take effective legal and political measures to eradicate colonialism, to bring perpetrators of suspected war crimes and crimes against humanity to justice at the ICC, and to publicly recognize and collectively overcome Israel's apartheid regime imposed over Palestinian people as a whole. What the movement should seize in the present moment is always having our main demand, that is to dismantle the apartheid regime at its core. So while our imminent demands must persist, including immediate release of all Palestinian prisoners, the just call for ending apartheid must stay at the core. We now have an opportunity to strengthen the demands of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions global movement. There is no more pressing time than the present time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yafa, for sharing this testimony with us. It's mind-boggling when you hear the stories of prisoners and their families, and this is ongoing. And the entire world is watching. That is why we have to follow. And you know, each person who's watching right now, who's listening to us, your voice matters. Your voice matters. You can go to Al Damir website. You can write to your MP. There is a way that you can help and you can contribute. Thank you so much, Yafa, for sharing with us. And I turn it over to Hammam.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Yafa. That was really important for all of us to hear. I'm going to now introduce a very special speaker that we have straight from Gaza. I am introducing Haneen Zakut. I'm excited to introduce you, Haneen. Haneen joined us live from Gaza from We Are Not Numbers. We Are Not Numbers was founded to document the daily personal struggles and triumphs, the tears and the laughter, and the universal aspirations of Palestinians in Gaza that don't make the daily news. Haneen is a writer for We Are Not Numbers, as well as an undergraduate studying physics major and a mathematics minor at the Islamic University of Gaza. She has dreamed of becoming an astrophysicist since childhood. Hi, Haneen.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I am a member of We Are Not Numbers, which is led by youth for youth. Basically, it offers writers like me, a platform to narrate their personal stories on a humanitarian level and to get our voices heard outside to the outer world. My goal personally as a member is to cover the Palestinian human stories that are much more than just numbers that we watch on daily news. That are affected by the Israeli aggression. The world, they need to hear me because more than half of the Gaza's 2 million population are under the age of 25. We are hardly even allowed to speak up for ourselves. That's why We Are Not Numbers exist. It exists to give me, my generation, a megaphone to help us stay connected within Gaza to the outer world and vice versa. Especially at this time of crisis, when the COVID-19 is taking the world in its claws. Meanwhile, for Gazans, it still remains like an anecdote, like a hot topic of our conversations because it hasn't spread yet in Gaza. Due to the government's quick measures taken at first when the cases arrived at the borders of Gaza, yes, they were kept they were in quarantine quickly, and there was no interactions happening between these civilians. So that helped Gazans stay a safe zone for the rest of the world. But the possibility of like COVID-19 pandemic spreading in Gaza, it definitely is like a nightmare. It will be devastating. But let's be honest, I mean, it's not something new to us. I mean, we have been dealing with catastrophes like that. We have been dealing with being under siege for like 12 years. We have dealt with wars. We have dealt with catastrophe. We have dealt with 1948, Nakba. I mean, what could be worse than that for Palestinians? Even if we're not, affected by the virus yet, we definitely are affected by the Israeli occupation on humanitarian basis, on financial basis, on every basis on our lives. Still, I mean, the idea to say that the blockade has kept us safe from the virus and it's like a blessing, I mean, it's lunatic to even think like that. Because our healthcare system, it is inadequate. We are lacking testing kits. We are lacking hospital beds. I mean, 2 million people are crammed in small space. We have no other place to flee in case the outbreak happens. So, and also we have polluted water. We are less updated. We have shortage of electricity. So this old toxic environment that has been imposed on us by the Israeli occupation, that creates a perfect environment for COVID-19 to just spread its wings and fly and affect everyone inside Gaza. We already have unemployment that increases the rate of poverty, that makes us even more vulnerable in front of the COVID-19. That's how we've been living. That's how our situation has been since the last 12 years. But still, that doesn't stop people in Gaza to look to the brighter side of life. At first, yes, when the cases arrived at the borders, people were panicked. We stayed confined in our homes. But after the situation got under control, people started moving outside. The streets became more lively, and people are still celebrating the month of Ramadan like any Ramadan. So it's been like normal. It's been fine. We're dealing with it fine. But in the end, I'd like to say this importantly is that my goal is to show you that we still need help for our cause from you people to help it to spread it, because I really cannot be there physically, okay? You can share our voices. You can follow us on our website, sharing our stories with your family members, your friends, maybe with people who are actually supporting Canada's aid to Israel. So by sharing our stories, you're not only helping us standing up financially, but also emotionally, because our souls need to be fed. So when you're sharing our stories, you're helping us to feel like, yes, we are a part of this world too. We matter too. Thank you.
Thank you, Haneen, so much for giving all of that information. That was really important for us to hear what you are going through. It must be horrific to go through such a painful existence in Gaza. But it's really good to see that you are persevering, that you are enduring, and doing the best you can under the circumstances. And we really hope to see you soon. Hope to be able to come back to Gaza and to meet all of you one day.
Yeah.
So now I will introduce Joel Harden. He is a very special guest with us today. I only learned that Joel was joining us recently, and that was a very pleasant surprise for all of us. So Joel Harden is the Ottawa Centre Member of Provincial Parliament. He is a progressive voice in Canada's new Democratic Party, the NDP, and one of the leading voices in the provincial opposition in Ontario. He has always been a fierce supporter of Palestinian rights, so we're honored to have him here with us. Joel and I go way back to our days as anti-war activists and troublemakers at York University. So Joel, it's so good to see you again. Welcome.
Well, thank you, my dear friend Hamam. It is nice to see you and everybody there. Really, it's an honor to be in this panel with so many of the folks who are doing grassroots solidarity work with Palestinians. And Haneen, so good to see you from Gaza, and thank you for your words. I want to offer a special welcome and hello to my friends Zahia and Durka, who are here, who've presented themselves as candidates for our party. It is nice to see our party represented today. As Yafa said, I offer greetings from what we know here as Ottawa, but it is the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. I want to join everybody else in remembering what the Nakba meant. Yafa said it very eloquently. I also think the work of the cultural studies theorist Henry Giroux guides me today, if people are familiar with his work. Professor Giroux has this concept of the violence of forgetting, the violence of organized forgetting. And if I think of what the Nakba means for someone who isn't Palestinian, who's Canadian, who tries to understand what is right and wrong and do what's in my power to support people working for justice, I think about the centrality of needing to remember. And I also think about the Palestinian people and their allies who've persevered in insisting we not forget. I'm thinking in particular of Yafa's mom, Khalida, who has been in prison for years, as she said, without a fair trial. I know Khalida is one leader in a nation of many, but for me, she is the face of a people who refuse to be forgotten. I've learned about Khalida through her life's work and through my friendship with Yafa, who, like me, lives here in Ottawa Centre. And I also think Khalida and Yafa represent something that happens when we dare to stand up for injustice. When you scrape the surface of many of our erstwhile democracies, what you uncover very quickly, if you ask the wrong questions, according to people in power, is organized violence. We are no stranger to what organized violence looks like, even in Ottawa with other cases, and I want to talk about that. In 2014, Hassan Diab, a Carleton University lecturer, was also exposed to that violence. He was accused of a crime in France in 1980 with no serious evidence against him. In 2014, our federal government extradited him to France, and he was separated from his family for 3 years until the case against him fell apart. And it fell apart because of the work of human rights defenders in Europe and here at home. Mohammed Harkat, my friend here in Ottawa Centre, also had the same experience. He was arrested here under the security certificates regime of our federal government in 2002, accused of terrorism and jailed for 3 years. His lawyers and my friend Mohammed was never allowed to see the evidence against him. Like Hassan Diab, like Khalida Jarrar, Mohammed and his lawyers were never allowed to know the charges against them. Mohammed was released from prison in 2006, again, due to the tenacious human rights movement that we have here in Ottawa, headed by his wonderful partner, Sophie Harkat, and allowed to live at home under strict surveillance. In 2006, our Supreme Court here ruled that the security certificates regime was unconstitutional. But even today, what I hear from Sophie is that Mohammed still worries about the imminent threat of deportation. So all of that is to say, here in Ottawa, we are no stranger to the need to challenge the abuse of power and miscarriages of justice. There is a tradition here, and I would like to think across the world, in making sure human rights and due process exists for everyone. And when human rights and due process is breached in the defense of democracy, my view is the content of democracy is hollowed out, and we have to speak out. So when someone asks me to stay silent about Khalida or the Palestinian people, what I tell them with a smile on my face is that they are asking me not to do my job. When I got elected in the summer of 2018, I made a very solemn vow to my family and to the people who live here that I would stand up for the people and families of Ottawa Centre. Yafa Jarrar is a member of our community. Khalida Jarrar is her mom. Those who ask me to stay silent while Khalida languishes in jail with hundreds of others under administrative detention without charges are asking us to uphold a regime that has no defense, a process that has no defense. I have to end by saying something else. There's another obligation I have as a Canadian politician. Our country has the dark legacy of colonialism right here at home. And in many respects, the Canadian model of colonialism has been emulated around the world. Long before pass systems existed in other places, we had our own here. I invite everybody watching, if you can, to watch the documentary film released in 2016 called The Pass System. What you will see there is that Canadian officials told the Indigenous peoples of these territories where and when they could go. We took their children and attempted to ethnically cleanse communities. We jailed and executed Indigenous leaders when they rose in the defense of their people. So when we walk the path of reconciliation here, which is a popular thing for politicians in Canada to claim to do. I believe we have an obligation to challenge colonial systems everywhere. Reconciliation for me is not a Canadian project. It's a global project. Let us acknowledge that today on the Nakba. Let us remember and refuse the violence of organized forgetting. So that in a nutshell, my friends, is why I am so honored to be here to commemorate the Palestinian Nakba, support the freedom of Khalida Jarrar, and to commit with you to make sure we end the violence of forgetting. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Joel, for this testimony and for sharing this with us. And I'd like also to highlight your continual support for the Palestinian cause, the people of Palestine, and for Canadian Palestinians living in Ottawa in your writing. And this is what we expect from our politicians, to be on the side of justice, to be on the side of human rights. So thank you so much for that. I have actually the extreme pleasure right now of introducing Layla Al-Ali. As you all know, as you all heard at the beginning, I was born as a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, and Layla is speaking to us from Lebanon. And we have some of the most impoverished Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. As you all know, in 1982, Israel also invaded Lebanon and they committed the massacres of Sabra and Shatila. And this is a memory that we should not forget at all, and that we should continue to remind people of the suffering that the people of the camps still go through today. So it is a great honor for me as well to introduce Layla, and so she can talk to you about what's happening in Lebanon and for our Nakba commemoration. So Palestinian refugee and political feminist. She's a woman and an activist. She was born in the Shatila camp with an education background in psychology and philosophy. She's member of the Palestinian National Council, gender and refugee women expert, leading one of the oldest and largest women NGOs, working with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, Najdi Association. And I do have a very close connection with the Najdi Association, so does my family. So it's very heartwarming for me to be able to introduce Layla Al-Ali. Layla?
Thank you, Zahia. Thank you for the those who are preparing this panel. It's important, I think, even with this pandemic, to have such a kind of international action, not only national actions that usually are taking place in each country. So thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction, Zahia. I'm proud that you introduced me, especially you have been known to our Palestinians in Lebanon, as you also know what Najdi is doing, what all Palestinian women in Lebanon suffer from. I'll try to be brief as much as I can. So directly I'll go to the point. With the Oslo Agreement, Palestinian refugees in general and Palestinian refugees in Lebanon in particular were forgotten by putting the whole cause aside. This had consequences on their national and human rights in Lebanon in general, with the minimal access to humanitarian and humanitarian services and support. This was experienced, unfortunately, after the Oslo Agreement. The case is different now with the deal of the century, which is non-negotiable deal, and which is shaped also the daily life of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon 2 years before it produced or published in its full text. Despite the previous miserable situation, by the end of 2018, there were attempts to dismantling UNRWA by drawing its financial resources through the cut of the USA committed contribution, as well as through attempts to redefining the refugees and their status, as well by trying to canceling the legal status of the Palestinian camps or the camps in general. Since then, the socioeconomic situation of Palestinians in Lebanon getting more miserable, especially that they lack access to any of the human rights or public services from the government. The cut of the state's fund impacted on UNRWA budget by taking cut measures on the major services provided to Palestinians in Lebanon. Talking here about the main and major services such as education, health, and infrastructure of the camp. Unfortunately, 1 year after the deal of the century was taken or stepped on the ground, and before it was published in June 2019, additional restrictions and measures were imposed by the Lebanese Minister of Labor, not only on the access to work for Palestinians, but also on lack of access and right to establish their own businesses. This led to shut down many of the Palestinian businesses and kicking out to streets hundreds of Palestinian workers and employees. Palestinians' reaction was 2 months of daily uprising in the camps against these, but also against discrimination, demanding for the whole and full human rights. The measures at the end were frozen due to the Palestinians' continuation of the demanding, but then the Lebanese uprising came and started, which we were hoping that it will be ending to something leading to giving the Palestinians their full human rights. Anyhow, the Lebanese uprising came before we seeing any improvement on any of the Lebanese social or economic aspects as demanded by the Lebanese population, the coronavirus spread out. With such pandemic, vulnerable groups as Palestinians, usually they suffer double and triple, with the absence of a national, governmental, or a host or international agency services that taking care of them on a daily basis. Nowadays, some figures talking about 80% as unemployment rate of Palestinians in Lebanon, which will lead to really a humanitarian catastrophe. During the last few years, I have to end up by saying this. During the last few years, Palestinians in Lebanon used to commemorate in Nakba by marching to the borders between Lebanon and Palestine, even though so many of them were killed or injured. This year, because of the situation of the pandemic, they couldn't do it. Anyhow, this action considered as a symbolic resistance and expression on the right to return to their homelands that their parents or all generations belong to. Despite all of these challenges and situation, Palestinians this year, we also commemorate in Nakba by different types and means of actions as much as it possible. Lastly, I would like to join my voice to your voice. As a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, also calling upon the whole international community to stop the suffer of the Palestinians in general, not only the Palestinian refugees, but all Palestinians, by ending the occupation, putting pressure on Israel to withdraw from our lands, especially the occupied territories in 1967 years. Also, by releasing all Palestinian prisoners, especially the political prisoners, because those are suffer more than others, and enabling the Palestinian refugees to return to their homelands based on the UN Resolution 194. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Layla, for sharing this with us and for bringing us news from the Palestinians, refugees living in Lebanon. And like you said, you pointed at the end, the importance of the right of return. This is essential at the heart of our Nakba for Palestinian refugees to return home. So thank you for sharing that with us. And now I turn it over to Hammam.
Thank you, Layla, again for sharing that with us. The Palestinian right of return is, of course, at the core of our struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. And
thank you.
This is the only way to a lasting peace in the Middle East is for Israel to to allow the right of return to Palestinian refugees. No one can keep us away from our homeland forever.
Sure.
So I will next introduce our next special speaker from the West Bank. From the anti-settlement resistance in the West Bank, we have Badi Adwaik. Badi Adwaik is a Palestinian organizer, writer, documentary filmmaker, and human rights activist in Hebron, Al-Khalil, in the occupied West Bank. He is the co-founder of Human Rights Defenders, a Hebron-based nonviolent grassroots anti-settlement organization on the front lines of documenting Israeli police and military violence within Palestinian communities so that the world can witness the daily reality Palestinians endure under Israeli occupation. Hello, Badia, and welcome. Well, make sure to turn your mic on, Badia. Your mic is off. There you go.
Okay, sorry that. So thank you for to give me this is a chance to be with you and to talk with all of you, and it's a great chance to be together from over different places. We're gathering with Gaza and also Canada and other places. And Gaza, you know, just like about an hour from my home here, but we cannot do it, and it's become like an impossible to do it. I have been traveled to Gaza in 1986 in order to go to fix our car with my father, which is now it's kind of impossible to do it, and to travel to Canada, maybe it's more easy to go to Gaza more than to go to Gaza. Okay, the situation of Hebron here, I am start with Gaza and the link between Gaza and Hebron because I see that the most difficult places in Palestine we can always representative is to talk about it is Gaza and Hebron. So I'm going to talk and focus about Hebron, which is a city that when I am live, and also I'm just like a few meters from a settlement which is called a tailor-made settlement. Based in the heart of Hebron city, and this is one of the things and one of the differences between Hebron and between other places in Palestine, that we have the colonizers and settlements. They are based in the heart of the city between the people, and just a few meters between the Palestinian family and between the settlers who are living, and they are force the people to take their lands and also their houses. So Hebron situation, it's very complicated, and usually when we want to talk about the humiliation and apartheid regime and apartheid system and the ethnically cleansing policy which is Israeli applied against the Palestinian generally in whole Palestine, we managed to use Hebron as a micro example to talk about all of that, because in Hebron the Israeli occupation applying all the kinds of forms of apartheid and also ethnically cleansing and which is we call it and collective punishment, and which is we call it quiet transfer policies that Israelis applied in Hebron. And just here when I am live here in Tal Mede and Shuhada Street and all of this is places have been shut down after the massacre, which has happened in 1994. In this Ramadan, the same Ramadan was 15 of Ramadan, and a Zionist settler, his name is Baruch Goldstein. He has been break inside the mosque, and he has been open his automatic gun, and he fired and killed in that time about 29 Palestinians, more 150 injured. And the results, as what the Nakba, we are living now the memory of the Nakba, about 72 of the Nakba. So it's the same situation. What has happened in the Nakba, we are still living the forms, we still live the effects and the results of the Nakba. The Nakba is not stopped, and the Nakba is still going on in our life in different forms. And what this is also the same what happened for the massacre. The massacre, we still live the massacre effects and the massacre results right now. All this is political, all of this is military checkpoints, which is about 111 military checkpoints and closed roads and also electronic gates and also cameras, which is Israeli occupation. It's been have been established after the massacre. And also by that, also they're applying the collective punishment against the Palestinian people who are the victims of this is massacre. And that's why 2009 we got a guest or a delegation came from South Africa. Those people have been struggling and they were an activist against South African apartheid. In 2009, those people, when they have been came here and in Hebron and they have been witnessed this situation, I have seen it in their eyes. They said, this is apartheid. What is going on in Hebron, it's more hard than the apartheid in South Africa. And then we start with them to cooperate about a project, which is, we call it in that time, we call it Open Shuhada Street. But after that, we managed to change the name of this campaign and we decided to call it Dismantle the Ghetto. Dismantle the Ghetto, take settlers out of the Hebron because the situation of Hebron and the people suffering because of the settlements and the street itself, it's been closed because of those settlements and because the occupation still exists and continues in Hebron. So the image of Hebron, which is people that can come to see it, they can easily understand what does it mean occupation, what does it mean to live under apartheid, also what does it mean also ethnically cleansing that Israeli, they're applying this is policy against the Palestinians. Then I can say that Hebron has become a capital of apartheid for all the countries around the world. If anyone who wants to see the apartheid and ethnically cleansing and also all of this is ugly forms of the Israeli occupation faces, he can come to see it and he can feel it and he can touch it, and he's not need also a long time to feel that. He will feel it directly. And honestly, I am organizing a political tour for many people who are coming to Hebron to witness and to see this situation. Some of them, they couldn't even to continue the tour because of this strong images of Hebron, and which is they block them to continue with this situation and to witness this situation. So despite of this is a black image of this situation, the Palestinian resistance still go on everywhere in Palestine. You heard about what happened in Ya'bad, and also now Ya'bad is still under a siege for like 5 days, and every day they are invaded the Ya'bad. And you heard about what happened in Zawiya yesterday, which is in the south of Nablus. That means that the Palestinians, they're not giving up. The Palestinians, they are still continue their resistance with all the simple abilities which is available for them. And part of this is resistance, which is we are applying here also in my organization, Human Rights Defender Organization, also to expose this is occupation, the Israel occupation. So for that, we decided to extend and to run a project which is, we call it Capturing Occupation Camera Project. By this project, we have been shoot many of the videos and many of cases, and many Palestinians murdered who have been killed in blood, in cold blood way. And one of this story, which is very famous story, the Abdel Fattah al-Sharif, the Palestinian boy who has been assassinated and have been killed by an Israeli soldier, his name Ori Azaria. After that, we discovered this is named by the media. And Israelis were consider him a hero, and even they were celebrated when he has been released from jail after they kept him for like 6 months, which is his sentence was originally was 18 months, which was not fair. And we saw all of this is theater game, which is Israeli government have been run about this is court. And part of this is work we try to focus in the camera field and also the non-violence resistance in the ground, in order that to bring 3 pillars in our resistance: the media and the law, and also the documentation, also to link all of those pillars with each others, to make more our work is more effective and more strong. And recently you have been heard also that Israelis, they are confiscated part of the properties which is around the Ibrahim Mosque, which is this is actually is a big propaganda, because the Israeli occupation already they are confiscated everything in the old town and also around the Ibrahim Mosque. So this is not something new. And also the Israeli settlers and the Israeli soldiers still attacking the Palestinian houses and the Palestinian families who are living in their houses, and they never stop, even in the pandemic, in the corona pandemic situation. The settlers and the soldiers, they never stop this is attacks, and also invaded the Palestinian houses. My home, for example, have been invaded many times by the Israeli soldiers because of my activism, and they many times treat me and try to break me and take me down in order to stop my activism. And also I've been investigated many times. I've been detained and arrested about 19 times because of my activism. And the first time I spent 3 years in Israel jail when I was 19 years and a half. And as I told you, we arise in this situation, and this is an government, and this is injustice situation. So the Palestinians, they have no many option left for them, only one option, just to resist, to exist, because now we are not resist for to exist one state solution or democratic state solution or even two state solution. The Palestinian, this is period and this is time which is very sensitive and very important time. The Palestinians, they are defending their existence in this land, because the Israelis, after Trump become the the president of USA, he are decided to apply many of policies which is others didn't apply it before, because he managed to give Israelis not just support behalf of America, he gave them a blind support, and he recognized first Jerusalem as capital for America, for Israel, and also the High Golan also part of Israel.
You,
and now they are also another policy. Now they are going also to take part of West Bank and also Jordan Valley to be also part of from Israel. So what is left for the Palestinians? The only thing which is left for the Palestinians to keep the resistance, and there are no any option for the Palestinians left only to keep this resistance, because we are defending our existence, and it's a matter of time. If we are not now have the abilities and the powerful to take our rights, this does not mean that we should be giving up about our rights, because we believe deeply, and this is what we try to educate our kids. One day, sooner or later, we will get our political rights and also human rights, but we shouldn't be given up about our rights anymore.
Thank you. Wow. That was so important for us to hear. So energetic and informative. We definitely stand in solidarity with Palestinians enduring the onslaught of the settlement, the Israeli settlement project.
Thank you so much, Badia. I just wanted to highlight as well that we have received in Canada on a tour Imad al-Tamizi, who is from Khalil as well, and he came
from our group.
Yes, he came with the Canadian Palestinian Postal Workers Union, and they highlighted and brought to light what's happening in Al-Khalil and Hebron and what you're all going through over there. So thank you so much for this passionate testimony. We need to hear more of that.
Thank you so much for your listening and your attending, and to give me this chance.
Great. Do we have Muhammad Ali here with us?
We're just waiting because we were supposed to have a musical basically pause with the hip-hop artist Muhammad Ali. So we're just checking if he's online with us. And I'll just take this time as a reminder that for all of you out there watching and listening to us, if you have any questions, we will hold a question and answers period towards the end. And we'll be taking in your questions, and we'll ask you please to direct them to one of our speakers. That way we know who the question is addressed to. So just save your questions till the end, and we'll be happy to direct them towards our speakers. So Hammam, do we have Muhammad Ali with us?
I see his name, but not. He doesn't seem to be responding. So we can move on to our next speaker then, and maybe come back and see if Muhammad Ali joins us, which would be Cheryl. Zahia, hand it to you to introduce Cheryl.
Thank you so much. So again, it's great for me to be introducing Cheryl. Cheryl Nestle is a member of the National Steering Committee of Independent Jewish Voices. She has been an activist for peace and justice in Palestine and Israel for more than 50 years. She's a retired academic and writes frequently on the Jewish response to Israel's ongoing colonial repression of the struggle for Palestinian freedom. And I can't stress enough the importance of this beautiful collaboration between independent Jewish voices and members of the Palestinian community and all of you on this panel, because this is what we need in order to reach a true, just, and lasting peace. Cheryl, I turn it over to you.
You'll need to put your mic on, Cheryl.
Okay, am I?
Yes, there we go. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Zahia, very much, and Hamam as well. And it really is an honor to be on this panel of incredibly courageous folks. And I'm really glad to be among, I think, hundreds of people who are on this call, who've come together to commemorate the 76th anniversary of the Nakba. To my great regret, as a Canadian Jew, I'm a member of a community whose institutions have, for the most part, lent moral, financial, and political support to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Many of my fellow Jews respond with indifference or hostility to the fact that 72 years of Israeli independence rests on a horrific foundation: the largely willful expulsion of more than 750,000 Palestinians from their homes and lands, the destruction of Palestinian lives and communal ties, and the brazen erasure of evidence that much of Israel is built on stolen land where Palestinian communities once flourished. Pro-Palestinian Jewish activists believe that support for the Palestinian struggle is a moral and strategic imperative, which is based in historic Jewish values of social justice. We demand an honest reckoning with the violent historical record of the Israeli state. As my friend Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb wrote this week, the diversity of Zionist narratives which pervade Israeli art, literature, media, theater, entertainment, public histories, physical neighborhoods, and the ubiquitous institutions of Israeli militarism cannot erase the reality of the Nakba. The gaze of Zionism has enabled the building of massive walls of denial that keep occupation in place, which is a perfect reflection of the actual apartheid wall that imprisons millions of Palestinians. A society built on apartheid cannot stand. Like all of you, I feel immense frustration when challenging injustices committed by powerful political and military actors thousands of kilometers away. Indeed, our most urgent demand is that the Israeli boot be removed from the Palestinian neck. However, the battle for historical truth and accuracy and our inherent right to speak it has arrived on our doorstep. And this is by no means a trivial struggle. The long arm of Israeli apartheid policy has now insinuated itself even more brazenly into our local and federal politics. Increasingly, institutions and governments worldwide are being urged to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. Among other things, the definition calls for a ban on some forms of speech critical of Israel, including naming Israel as a racist state. This disturbing acceptance of Israeli exceptionalism is astonishing. Indeed, it is impossible to imagine such a ban being posed in relation to almost any other nation state. Under Trudeau, the definition has already been adopted by Global Affairs Canada and incorporated into the federal anti-racism strategy. A bill to implement the IHRA definition is currently poised for a third reading in the Ontario legislature, and Israel advocacy groups are calling for it to have legislative teeth, opening up some forms of criticism of Israel to legal prosecution. I just want to make clear that vigorously opposing anti-Semitism is an absolute imperative. Violent expressions of Jew hatred, largely fueled by white nationalist ideology, are increasingly evident. And our fight against anti-Semitism cannot and must not be separated from our fight against all forms of racist hate. In an insidious sleight of hand, the IHRA definition seeks to brand critical speech on Israel, support for BDS, and the movement for Palestinian freedom as anti-Semitic, thus deflecting attention away from the true sources of anti-Semitism. The IHRA definition has been used worldwide to shut down Palestinian solidarity events, to rescind awards to leading scholars, and to launch investigations of students and faculty who dare speak out on Israeli violence. It is a serious threat to academic freedom, freedom of expression, and freedom to dissent in Canada. It is a serious threat to achieving justice for Palestine. You can learn more, if you're interested in this, you can learn more at noihra.ca. If we truly want to see Palestinian freedom, we must oppose anti-Palestinianism in all its manifestations. Anti-Palestinianism is now on our doorstep in the form of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. On this Nakba Commemoration Day, let us resolve to fight those who would suppress the struggle for Palestinian freedom, whether they attempt to do so with blockades, with bullets, or with muzzles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing that. Very good to hear from our Jewish friends and allies. Very important that we remain united in the face of racist Zionism. So our next speaker, I will introduce Barry Weisletter. Yeah, he is a teacher, a union organizer, a writer, an editor, an anti-war and anti-Zionist activist. He is the Federal Secretary of Socialist Action Canada. Barry Weisletter, I'm very pleased to introduce you and to have you here. I know you've been one of the organizers with us for this event. I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Hamam and Zahia. It's a great pleasure to join together, to come together, all of us, in saying loud and clear, break the siege of Gaza, no annexation of the West Bank, free, free Palestine. On May the 18th, 2019, the first Pan-Canadian Day of Action for Palestinian Rights took place. In Toronto, close to 500 people rallied and marched to demand justice for the Palestinian people. Today, under the pandemic, our cause is more urgent. COVID-19 is a dagger pointed at the heart of Gaza. It is a dagger wielded by Israel, which has imposed a 14-year blockade of nearly 2 million Gazans. The obstruction of medicine and health equipment by Israel poses the threat of a severe humanitarian catastrophe. Canada should break the siege of Gaza by sending aid right now. We know that at least since 2017, public opinion in Canada backs sanctions against the Zionist state. Still, the authorities at all levels try to vilify, even to outlaw boycott, divestment sanctions, to ban the Al-Quds March, to stop anti-Zionist free speech. This is a sign of panic by the Zionists and their friends in big business and the state. It is a sign of weakness. The Palestinian people are in the forefront of resistance to world imperialism. They did not choose this role. It was thrust upon them. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the early 20th century, the Western powers carved up the Middle East as they did Africa and Asia earlier. Winston Churchill, Britain's war minister in 1919 to 21, authorized dropping poisonous mustard gas on the population of Iraq. In the face of rebellion by the Arab masses across the region, the imperial masters sponsored a military fortress there in the heart of the Middle East. They exploited the survivors of the Nazi Holocaust for their greedy goals. But the fact remains, Israel is a colonial settler state. It is an outpost of imperialism in the Arab East. Shamefully, the USSR under Joseph Stalin voted at the UN for the partition that unleashed the Nakba. The Zionist state was founded on a big lie, that Palestine was a land without people for a people without land. But the Palestinian people are here today to refute that lie. I speak for Socialist Action as its federal secretary. Socialist Action is part of the World Trotskyist movement. Our movement opposed the creation of the Zionist state 72 years ago. We opposed the so-called two-state solution, which is just a cover for racism and ethnic cleansing. The truth is, there is no solution to the Jewish question under capitalism. The only solution is world socialist revolution. World capitalism perpetuates racism, war, disease, and climate catastrophe that threaten the very existence of civilization. The best hope for humanity is self-empowerment of workers and oppressed peoples, the revolutionary road forward. The precondition for that is firm and undying support for national liberation struggles, which only the working class and poor farmers can lead all the way to victory. That means no reliance on bourgeois parties or on the capitalist state or on imperialist military alliances like NATO. This is a cornerstone of Leon Trotsky's strategy, which is summed up in 2 words: permanent revolution. Oppressed nations the world over, from Kurdistan to Ireland to the Philippines, have long eaten the bitter fruit of betrayal after their aspirations to national liberation have been subordinated to the preservation of capitalist rule. Party leaders and corporate media conceal the shift in public opinion against the occupation. The truth is, my friends, we represent the majority. It's time to target Canadian corporations that profit from the misery of the Palestinian people. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh should join unions and social justice organizations in this movement, or he should step aside. There are many states guilty of atrocious crimes, it's true. But Israel is a linchpin of global imperialist rule. Richard Nixon, a strident anti-Semite, put it best when he called Israel, and I quote, America's biggest aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean. Freedom for Palestine means freedom for humanity. For that reason, we will not stop demanding: break the siege of Gaza, no to annexation of the West Bank, end the occupation, tear down the apartheid wall, for the right of all refugees to return home, for a democratic and secular Palestine for all of its residents, Muslims, Jews, Christians, and atheists. Disarm the nuclear powers, starting with the USA and its Israeli client state. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barry, for delivering this truly, truly passionate message, and for your solidarity with the Palestinian people, and for siding with human rights and for justice and for justice. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
I would like right now to introduce our upcoming guest, Durka Prout. Durka was the NDP's 2019 candidate for London North Centre, and she's a co-chair of the Federal NDP's Women Commission and is a member of the Federal Steering Committee of the Socialist Caucus. She looks forward to the day when the human rights of the Palestinian people are all upheld. Durka, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us and to be able to hear your voice and to be able to have you commemorate Nakba with us. It's such an important day for us Palestinians, for all believers in human rights and justice all over the world. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to pull up my stuff here. I hope you're hearing me well because I switched over to my headset for better reception. And I'm greeting you from London, Ontario, the home of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Lenape people, and bring greetings from where I grew up, the Caribbean, ancestral home of several indigenous peoples, including the Taino, Arawak, as well as a mixed Afro-Indigenous people called the Garifuna. So solidarity is an action rooted partially in the willingness and openness to exchange and learn and exchange with others, and the acceptance of and participation in interconnected struggles. These two elements were on display in November 2012 when the Caribbean community, CARICOM, overwhelmingly voted to grant Palestine non-member observer status at the UN. It is noteworthy that Canada, the self-professed darling of democracy, voted against this accord. Until fairly recently, there was an absence of Palestinian immigrants in the Caribbean. Despite being on distant shores, my Caribbean sisters and brothers were willing and open to examine the Palestinians' plight. As victims of racism and oppression, they saw a nation trapped in poverty, unemployment, and limited access to adequate health, education, water, and electricity. They saw an interconnected struggle against colonialism. The indigenous and African descendant Caribbean peoples understood the erasure of one's history. They understood displacement from the land of one's ancestors, and they understood the need for an organized and sustained resistance. As small island developing states within the Group of 77 and China, which represents about 80% of the world's population, CARICOM states were instrumental in selecting Palestine as the group's leader in January 2019. This simple yet bold act gave Palestine a high-profile global platform. This enabled her to work in a multilateral forum to learn from and help resolve interconnected struggles. It is noteworthy that in January of this year, Palestine handed over the chair of the G77 and China to Guyana. In 2011, Guyana formally recognized Palestine and has been promoting Palestinian ambitions on the global stage since the 1970s. At the 2020 G77 and China handover ceremony, the Palestinian Foreign Affairs and Expatriates Minister Riyad al-Malki remarked that the historic 2019 vote was, I quote, "a reflection of your confidence in the ability of the State of Palestine to deliver on the mandate it was entrusted with. Palestine knows firsthand what it means to be left behind and was privileged to be part of a group that defends every day the interests of developing countries," end quote. On this, the 72nd anniversary of Al-Nakba, I join in solidarity with the true lovers of liberty and the friends of Palestine for the restoration of peace to the people of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. I call for international law to be upheld and a stop to the illegal occupations, the violations of human rights, and the illegal siege of Gaza. I call on the Canadian government to break the siege with humanitarian aid to Gaza, support the BDS movement, and reject the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. As a daughter of the Caribbean, I salute the Palestinian people for their steadfast resistance in the face of relentless injustices. I join with them to affirm the Palestinian rights to unfettered self-determination, their right to independence and sovereignty, their right of return. May the solidarity of the Caribbean states warm the hearts of the Palestinian people and strengthen them in their struggles. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dirka, for sharing this with us, especially that solidarity also from the heart of the Caribbean movement. It just warms all of our hearts to hear this pouring in of solidarity with the Palestinian people, particularly on this day where we're all commemorating the Nakba across the world. And this is what the Palestinians need to hear, the all over, the international solidarity that is there with our right cause and our just cause. Hamam?
So I think we're going to check again if Muhammad Ali is with us. Muhammad, I think your mic is turned off. If you can turn that on so we can hear you.
Just in the meantime, while we're trying to fix the mic with Muhammad Ali, Dirka, you brought up the issue of Jerusalem. And again, we haven't, I mean, we could spend hours and days and months on this, but Palestinians in Jerusalem are living some of the harshest conditions because they basically have no status. And they keep on seeing parts and parts of their land confiscation, being denied the permit to just even renovate or build, as opposed to settlers who come in and are allowed directly to build. This is another situation that we must look at, and we must remember today while we are commemorating Nakba, that it has an ongoing effect on people who live in Jerusalem, and people who live in the camps, on people who live in Gaza, on people who live across Palestine and across the world that are still today, even though they are living in other countries, they are still refugees and suffer from the impact of what it is to be a refugee. So have we been able to fix the issue with Muhammad Ali and his...
No, unfortunately, we
No?
couldn't. So we'll have to move on. And yeah.
Introduce our next guest.
Yeah. Introduce our next guest, Dave Bleakney. Zahia, do you want to introduce him?
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to be able to introduce Dave and his long time support for the cause and for international solidarity. So Dave Bleakney is a longtime postal worker leader and international solidarity activist with a particular interest in Cuba and Palestine. Dave lives in Ottawa and is a member of the National Executive Committee of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. So it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be able to introduce you and to hear from you, especially for all the work that you've done with the Palestine Solidarity Movement.
Thank you for that kind introduction and for the invitation. And I want to start where Durka started, because I too am coming from London today, and rather repeat the land acknowledgement to take that as a kind of, I guess, opening to figure out where Canada sits in all of this and how we can make change here. And I want to first bring greetings from our national president, Jan Simpson, who couldn't be here today, but very much a supporter of the campaign. And so, I live in a country, and that land acknowledgement reminds us that at the time the Nakba was happening, in Canada, Indigenous people were actually confined to less than, I think, about 0.02% of their traditional territories, and they couldn't leave. They had to get special passes from a white Indian agent to even have any permission to leave. And Lord knows what kind of obstacles would have been involved in order to be able to leave the reserve. So this explains a lot, right? It explains that why, as a child, that I was taught in school that Israel was created out of the desert where no one lived, and this amazing project of greening the desert where no other humans were previously sounded like the most miraculous project in history. But this was what I was actually taught in New Brunswick as a child. And so it's with some shame we have to say that in my union, I think, was the first union in North America to openly criticize Israel. And that took until this century. It took until 2002, which when you think of it in these terms is quite shameful. So that narrative that was produced for generations in this country was incessant, and it was always that Israel good, Israel amazing, Palestinians bad, and it was as simple as that. And even when there were conflicts, we would always get one side presented. So you ask yourself, why does this happen? And it's like, because Canada, my nation, is the granddaddy of how to do this sort of softer colonialism, where you just sort of gradually just isolate an Indigenous population almost to extinction in the hope that you can actually eliminate it and remove their territories and land. And in fact, the South Africans learned very well from Canada and came here to study our apartheid system, the reservation system, and found that quite useful in setting up their bandstands and the system there. So there's a long history of sort of Canadian, I guess, compliance and invisibility when it comes to doing the right thing in Palestine, and it's shameful. And this leads us to the present moment, of course, where we see Canada seeking a seat at the UN Security Council. And I would encourage that. I don't think Canada should be in a position to be on the Security Council at this time, given its behaviors around not only human rights abuses in Canada that are often quite sort of, I guess one could say a bit sanitized or a bit even hidden, but we're a place with not a great track record when it comes to certain sectors of our population. So the question is then how do we undo this and recognize it? And I think one of the things is to deny, first of all, Canada a role on the UN Security Council right now, because we shouldn't be rewarded for this kind of behavior. There should be a very clear message. And this is something a worker in any country can do. You can pick up your phone and phone your elected officials and encourage them not to consider Canada in that vote at the UN. But another, I think, really, and we talk about the International Criminal Court as well, and the fact that the Canadian position that Israel shouldn't be held accountable for what are, of course, I mean, obvious crimes to everyone. I mean, dropping white phosphorus on a human population, those are chemical weapons, right? And they should be treated as such and recognized as such criminally. So why then are we giving Israel a buy? And the Canadian position is one absurd, and I would argue quite dangerous, in fact. And that's that Palestine's not a nation. Well, you know, of course, that's crazy in itself. Palestine's always been a nation. I'm sure the Palestinian people consider themselves as such. And most countries at the UN recognize Palestine as a nation. But let's even take that logic. What that says is, if you're not in what's considered a nation, then a state is free to commit atrocious human rights violations and war crimes. And so what we were saying then, for example, if we look at protectorates and colonies of other nations like Puerto Rico and so on, are we to say then that one can commit vast, you know, human rights abuses in those places because they're not a nation? So it's a kind of semantics that's a little bit bizarre, and it reflects, I think, a long history of Canadian sanitization around erasure, and not only what we see in Israel, but certainly what happens here. So I think there's a direct link between the two. Now, you know, that resolution that my union passed in 2002 was, I mean, it was passed overwhelmingly. I mean, it might have been a handful of dissenters out of a delegation of maybe between 500 and 600 postal workers from across Canada. So that was like a watershed moment. It was the first time that we felt we could actually say, like, we could criticize the state of Israel and not call ourselves anti-Semites, very clearly understand the difference between anti-Semitism and the behaviors of a horrible government against an Indigenous population. And that led to 2008, where their BDS sanctions resolution passed overwhelmingly in the union, and we've been part of that campaign ever since, and have been honored the fact that and inspired by making connections in Palestine through postal workers and with others and with our members, and we hope to continue those projects and recognize that it's up to the Palestinian people to decide their fate. It's not up for, you know, a Canadian union to do that, but it's certainly up to us to try to dismantle generations of I think, ignorance, erasure, and telling ourselves a myth that just wasn't really true. And I would say to our friends in Gaza and throughout Palestine and the West Bank and within Israel as well, all Palestinians and around the world, this is a struggle that inspires us. And I can only say that if we weren't listening in the last century, there's a lot more people listening now. And I think that can only grow just through the hard work and sacrifice that folks have made that inspires us all. So I think on that note, I would just, whoops, sorry, I lost my screen there, I think. On that note, I'll just end it there and just again offer my thanks and encourage every worker, wherever you are, every person, you sign the petitions, but also make those calls, make those, share information in our workplaces, share the stories of Palestinian people, sponsor people to come here and tell their stories. You know, we tried to sponsor someone, it took us 3 tries, which again reveals the Canadian state's, position on how they try to erase and obscure the truth. But we finally were successful. It's deepened our, I think, our relations. It's opened up a lot of dialogue with our members, and we continue to do so. So I just want to thank everyone here today for organizing this important recognition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you for sharing all of these thoughts and all of these actions, call to action with all of us, because this is what we ultimately need to do. We need a call to action, and we need people to act in order to go beyond just commemorating Nakba, but to have actually concrete action towards resolving the situation and guaranteeing Palestinians our rights of return amongst other rights. So thank you so much for all those who participated, for all the panelists. To say thank you isn't enough, because to have all of these voices on this day, this outpour of international solidarity and solidarity from the Canadian people here with our Palestinian people who are living in Palestine, who are living in refugee camps scattered all across the world, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Jordan, basically all over the world. Not only our thoughts, not only our hearts, but they are not forgotten. We think about them every day. We do every day what is in our best and what is in our power to maintain their voices, to have their voices heard by everybody. Because the worst thing that can happen is to feel that you are suffering and to be reaching out for a thread of hope, and you look around and you see that all over the world, you think that people are ignoring you. You are not ignored. We hear you. And our voices are just a way to magnify your voices and your demands and your needs. We heard a lot of beautiful testimony today from Yafa with her mom, Khaida, and her family story, from Badia in Hebron. We heard from Layla Ali in Lebanon. We had from our Caribbean solidarity people as well. We heard from the workers' unions and a call to unite and show solidarity with the Palestinian people all across. And this is what we have to keep in mind. I mean, Badia spoke to us about the checkpoints, about the electronic gates, about collective punishment, about ethnic cleansing. And this is where one of the current campaigns, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign, for example, comes to mind. This is something where we can adhere to, and it could cause an immediate impact on Israel and its economy. And it's a call to Israel to basically not only lift the siege on Gaza, but to ensure minority rights for Palestinians living within Israel, and to ensure Palestinians' right of return, and to dismantle the war that is an illegal action that was deemed by International Court of Justice. We heard also about prisoners' rights, and it's their basic rights that we are asking for. I mean, holding somebody under administrative detention without any right to seek a lawyer or not even know what they are being held for. This is an abuse, a blatant abuse of human rights, and we have to stand up for it. We also heard this beautiful testimony from Gaza, from Haneen, and telling us that we have to share our voices because our voices matters, and the importance of the voice of youth in Palestine. I mean, Gaza, as I said, is an open air prison, and you have the more than half of the society there who is under the age of 25 years old. Can you just imagine what kind of future they anticipate for themselves, or we are allowing them to see? And again, we're talking about going back to the essence, to basic human rights values. And this is what we should be focusing our attention to. We're speaking out today. We're reaching out to the international solidarity movement, to all those who are listening to us and watching us. We are speaking about the right of return. We are speaking about basic human rights issues. And this needs to be acted upon. We have an array of resources that is available to everybody, whether you go to Al-Damir online to sign petitions or to promote prisoners' rights, political detainees' rights, in order to have their basic, decent human rights afforded to them. We have jadaliya.com, where you have always not only news, but articles and information about what's happening in Palestine and how we can act. We can use the Nakba 72 hashtag also in order to promote the Nakba commemoration. We have this petition that is circulating that requests the Canadian government from Israel to immediately lift the blockade on Gaza and enable medical and humanitarian aid during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, this is something that we can do right now. Just go right now on the petition. You have the link, go on and sign it. We have also the Palestine Land Society, where you can see all the villages that were destroyed and that were occupied and colonized by Israel. And a lot of those villages, unfortunately, until today, either remain empty or have been occupied by settler colonialists. So we need to be aware of those villages, and we need to be aware of this information and to share it. We also have, as I mentioned, Al-Damir and Visualizing Palestine. Visualize Palestine is an amazing resource because it gives you information at the tip of your hands. Again, getting more information and circulating it, this is what we need. We also had recently an online fundraiser to send medical equipment into Palestine. It's pmrelief.ca. So if you'd like more information on that, you can go. And on that note, I want to remind you that this is an amazing collaboration between Independent Jewish Voices, Courage, and Palestine House. So we would like to promote a very tolerant atmosphere, and we'd like to open it now for the question and answers period. And please remember that you have to direct your question to one of our panelists, and this is a safe space, a respectful space, so please ask your questions accordingly. So Hammam, we're just going to go ahead and start with the first question that we received.
Okay. I just want to remind people that for those who don't know, they can go up to the three dots on the right-hand side at the top. That's where you'll find the chat feature. And in the chat is where you'll find the petition that you can sign directed to the Canadian government to break the siege on Gaza for the urgently needed medical supplies dealing with the current COVID-19 pandemic. Because if the coronavirus spreads in Gaza, we have a humanitarian disaster on our hands, more than it already is a disaster. But just to remind everybody that the UN said that by 2020, Gaza would be unlivable. And now we are in 2020. And it's just going to be very interesting to see what transpires. So we need to be able to step it up and need to be able to be ready to stand up for Palestinians and to show our solidarity. So to come to our questions, here's our first question from, this is from Jessa McLean. And she asks, I wonder if either or both of the hosts would be able to speak to how they cope mentally with such a personal fight. I cannot imagine how difficult it must be to have such personal connections and consequences. Ooh. Well, I can first speak for myself. Obviously, it's not easy. I'm from Gaza. I was born in Gaza and had to leave family members behind. I have my immediate family with me, thankfully, but my extended family, I was cut off from most of them. When the second Intifada started, I wasn't able to go back to Gaza after that. And then the siege, of course, started, and I've lost family members there. The older generation, my grandparents passed away. Every year we would hope and pray that we would be able to go back and visit, and that couldn't happen because of the circumstances, especially when the Israeli military sealed off the borders during the second Intifada, the uprising that took place there by Palestinians. So I was never able to go back and visit my grandparents until they passed away. But having said that, it's the events that happened in Gaza, losing my grandparents, losing family members, being dispersed and separated from my cousins and my uncles and aunts. That obviously had a huge impact on my mental health and on my development, both as a Palestinian and as a human rights activist and organizer. And I take inspiration from what happened from that loss. We Palestinians have experienced a profound loss, and it is signified by the Nakba. The Nakba symbolizes a huge loss for us, but that loss also drives us forward in order so that we can resist and reclaim our lands and our homes and be able to return and visit our families once more. So Zahia, I'll give it to you now.
Thank you, Hammam. We'll move on now to our second question. It's from Elizabeth Bice. She says, back in 2008, I was honored to be the lead speaker in the Canadian Union of Postal Workers convention to support the motion to support Palestine and BDS. How can we get, in your opinion, more support from unions? Thank you, Elizabeth Bice, retired but still active. So I would ask Dave to answer that questions.
Yeah, I think resolutions are really important. They raise the temperature a little bit and create discussion where there was none before. And even if the resolution gets shot down in a local way, it forces a discussion. It forces it out in the open. And one of the things the Zionists do is they, and everything is in secret, right? It's as much as obscure the voices and the truth as much as possible and present a sanitized narrative. So very much, I think resolutions are absolutely key at all levels. Own unions, their own locals, labor councils, national conventions, even city councils, even municipally, get them forced to talk about this in the open. I think it reaches out to sort of more members of the mainstream that that once the truth comes out, I mean, no, I don't think any human being could support what they see happening in Palestine. I hope that helps a little bit, Liz.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's important to be always on the ground and to push for those resolutions. And it takes a lot of work.
Zahia, may I add a word?
Yes, please go ahead, Barry.
Postal Workers Union is my favorite union, although I've never been a member of it. Wonderful, democratic, militant union. But even there, it's necessary to push. And Dave is right, resolutions are important, and grassroots organizing creates the conditions for resolutions to be successful. I just want to say that Elizabeth, who asked the question, is my partner. And I was at that convention in, I think it was in Montreal or Quebec City, of the Postal Workers Union in 2008, where the resolution came to the floor. And the chair, the president at the time, called on Elizabeth as the first speaker. But, you know, a lot of work went before that. And in fact, many unions, not the postal workers particularly, but many other unions tend to shy away from taking a strong stand on international policy issues. And it's important to recognize that we need to change the direction of the unions as well as the labor-based New Democratic Party. And that requires organizing inside each union and inside the NDP. That's what the Socialist Caucus does in the NDP. That's what the Workers' Action Movement does in the labor unions. And in many unions, we're active, pushing for not only shortening the work week and no more pipelines and recognizing indigenous people's rights, but hands off Venezuela, defend Cuba, and end the siege on Gaza, self-determination for the Palestinian people. We need to replace the leadership of most of the unions in order to move them to the left, to embrace international solidarity, to embrace social justice. There can be no justice in one country alone. It's a global effort, and it requires organization, and that's what we're dedicated to doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. So the next question, I believe, is for Badia. It's Fra Hughes. Hi, with ongoing house demolitions and house occupations, what is the future of Palestinians in Al-Quds? And this question is directed for you, Badia.
Okay, part of the Israeli occupation policy and the ethnic cleansing, I have been talk about it, that Israeli occupation, they are applying several policies. And sometimes you feel we have a common policy we should share everywhere in whole Palestine, but also in the same time in each city or each place we have some specialized and some differences. It's go on with the Israeli policy against the people. Whatever, like what is go on in 48, for example, and in Jerusalem, the Israeli occupation, for example, they make, the Palestinian people, it's growing, and when a Palestinian family become, have more kids and more sons and married, and they need also to extend their building or to build another home. So you should go through a very long process. You have to apply a permit, which is Israelis, they have to accept this permit, and this is take a very bureaucratic system. It's take like 10 years till you get this permit. And some Palestinians, they are, and also it costs a lot of money, so much money. Some of the Palestinian families, after they give up to get this permit, so they challenge the situation and they decide to build their apartments or their home. And Israeli occupation, after that, they come with their bulldozers and they are demolishing these houses, and also they make fine for the family above the bulldozer because they brought the bulldozer. So this is also a specialized things, which is it's more we can see it with this is permit issues and also the extended of the natural of the people who want to extend their houses. Some of these policies also going on as also collective punishment also against the Palestinians people who are fighting the occupation, which is this is go on everywhere in Palestine. When there are someone resist the occupation and become arrested, or he is become a martyr because he killed by the Israel occupation, after that they come and they are expelled. This is home, and this is also happened in the Hebron and also happened in many of Palestinian cities in West Bank, not just only in 48, also in or in Jerusalem. So all of this is collective punishment. This is illegal according to the international law. Unfortunately, the international law and the bodies which should be applying the international law, they are still watching the Israeli crimes against the Palestinians, and as Palestinians, they are living in another world, and they not make any actions against the Israeli. That why? Because the occupation. Why? Because since we have international law, especially I'm talking about the official level, they are watching the Israeli crimes and they are deal softly with Israel without real actions. That Israeli is see this is like a green line for them to continue their punishment and the crimes against the Palestinians. And the Palestinians, they have no any choice only to keep resist, because this is the only way for the Palestinians to keep their identity alive and to exist in their land. So what is going on in Jerusalem is the same here, the future of Jerusalem, that it's a message by the Israelis that they are trying to push the Palestinians to put them in the corner and order the Palestinians. They are decided by themselves after that to leave Jerusalem and to leave it for the Israelis, because we have a demographic war. The Israelis, they are do all of their efforts, and they do all the technical of humiliation against the Palestinians, generally, not just in Jerusalem, in many places in Palestine, and that's what is going on in Hebron. The only thing is different between Jerusalem and Hebron, that because Jerusalem is considered by the Israeli occupation as a capital of the state, that's why you cannot see a chic point inside Jerusalem, but you can see also other things which is Israeli occupation applying against the Palestinians, kind of like police. You see the police everywhere, the border police everywhere, humiliating the Palestinians, demolition the houses, which is I explained about it, and about this is the system of the permission system to apply to get to build a new house or to extend your house, as also happened in 48 cities. And also Hebron, you can see the settlements everywhere. In Jerusalem also you can see the settlements everywhere in the heart of Jerusalem, as well also in Hebron. So they are very strong connected between the situation which is go on in Hebron and go on in Jerusalem, because these two cities for Israeli occupation and for those Zionists, they are considered as like a holy cities for them in Palestine. So
there's also the issue of freedom of movement that is particularly difficult on Palestinians living in Jerusalem.
They are not available only free for the civil rights, which is declared according to international law. This is not available for the Palestinians. The freedom of movement in the same city is not applied. The settlement and the Shuhada Street is just away from my home, about like 7 minutes by foot. I cannot do it. I cannot go to Shuhada Street, which is just behind me. Also, as well, I cannot go to other cities like Jerusalem. I cannot do it. I cannot go to visit my cities in 48. If I want to go to Ramallah, also I have to go through checkpoints. I have to go to checkpoints through to Bethlehem, then to Ramallah. So this is right. The house's rights also is not available, where you are staying in your home and you feel that you are jailed in your home. Like what is going on here in Tel Mermeda and Shuhada Street. And the area which is Israelis, they are split because Hebron, it's been split for two parts. One is called H1 and H2. And this is which one?
I'm so sorry, I have to interrupt you. I mean, but your passion just goes to say how much Palestinians not only want to be heard and need to be heard and are at the forefront of wanting to talk and to negotiate and to discuss and to have a lasting peace negotiated for our rights. Thank you so much for this passionate testimony. And we should organize another event just to hear more of these personal testimonies so that people know what's going on the ground. Okay. We're going to move on to our next question. This is asked by Wa'il Gharbiye. This question is directed to Layla. What kind of participation/involvement you wish to see from our Palestinian community members and progressive activists in order to help reduce the social and economic impact our people are facing in the Lebanese refugee camps?
It goes through different levels. At the international level, there is a lot of pressure should be put on the states, first of all, to come back to the board and commit to the contribution to UNRWA.
So the focus is on UNRWA due to the relief.
Not each international community should do. Yep. So it's the whole responsibility of the international community on this catastrophe and on the refugee cause. So pressure should be put on the international community, on the states to come back to the board. This is first.
The sound is not clear, Layla.
Second, now I'll try to put the earphone. Saying that the international community is also responsible on the refugee cause. International community is responsible on the refugee cause, and therefore it should fill in the gap of the UNRWA deficit in order to serve the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and in other countries. The host communities are also responsible on the refugees. They have to allow Palestinians access to their human rights, including free movement, dismantling the checkpoints at the entrances of the camps, etc., etc. And the financial support is really important in this case, also for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I just would like to acknowledge that we have Hamad Ali with us, and we'll be able to hear from him once we wrap up towards the end. Hammam, do we have, what's the next question we have?
Next question. Are there any participants with their hands up? It doesn't look like it anymore.
Okay, let's see.
Nope.
No, I don't see any.
Okay, we had one before, but it's not anymore. Okay, so in the written questions here, we have another question for Layla Al-Ali. Yes, according to UNRWA, there were 400,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon before the arrival of more refugees from Syria. Since then, there has been pressure on Palestinians from the Lebanese government and the COVID-19 crisis. Has that forced some Palestinians to leave? And what is their current number now? And this question is from Khalid Muammar.
We have to notice that there are different figures on the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and there are so many categories of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. Those who are registered with UNRWA are around 500,000, although not all of them, they are residing in the country. Those who are residing in the country, the number is between 180,000 and 220,000. There is also a number related to the, we call it non-IDs. These are Palestinians, which is around 5,000 people, individuals. These are Palestinians who came to Lebanon between 67 and 70, and they were not registered with UNRWA or with any of the Lebanese public entity. They are ignored. They don't have any IDs. They cannot access hospitals, schools, etc. There is another category also, third category, which is the non-registered Palestinians. These are registered with the Lebanese government and not registered with UNRWA. Therefore, they don't have access to any of UNRWA services. Meanwhile, they don't have access to any of the public services, unfortunately. The fourth category is the Palestinian refugees who fled from Syria because of the war. The number right now is around 27,000, around. They were more, and so many they fled out of the country. Unfortunately, the discrimination and the restrictions from the Lebanese government against Palestinians, although it's almost same, but it's more on the Palestinian refugees from Syria. So they don't have residential card. They have to go through a process sometimes. They have to pay a lot, etc. Despite all of this, unfortunately, from our Palestinian representation, we don't have seen any efforts to formalize. I have to say that to formalize our official resident in the country, including access to the rights. So many of the Palestinians, they fled out, immigrated, I mean, abroad, while they continued to have their Palestinian refugee document. So they still have access to come to the country from time to time. It's different.
Layla, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to highlight a point. These Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon, these are refugees from one generation to the next. So the refugee status is basically brought onto one generation to the other, basically given from one generation to another, like a heritage, basically. It's part of our heritage to have that refugee status.
True, transformed from our parents, our grandparents, etc.
From the original Nakba in 1948.
Yeah, mainly for the 48 Palestinians. Those who came after that, as said, they fled wars in 67 and 70.
Absolutely.
Mainly. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Layla. Our next question from Jake Javanshire. The question is it at all possible for West Bank Palestinians to organize and overthrow the Palestinian Authority and elect some young leaders with vigor, vision, and stop collaborating with the evil Israelis? Jake. I think I'd like to begin by addressing this question. There are a couple of things that come to mind. One of them is the way that Israel has institutionalized discrimination and oppression over the Palestinians by having, for example, the law of return, land acquisition law, citizenship law, and most recently, nation-state law. That is notwithstanding all the day-to-day oppression. We spoke about collective punishment. We spoke about absence of human rights. We spoke about settler colonialism. In spite of all of that, and in spite of the not only inhumane but difficult conditions that Palestinians in Palestine, West Bank and Gaza included as a whole, Palestine and East Jerusalem, yet Palestinians have managed to resist the occupation, to maintain their role as a cause on the international level. And not only that, there was the launch in 2009 of a civil society call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions that was launched. And people all over the world have adhered to this campaign and with force in order to connect with Palestinians. Because ultimately, one thing that you are saying, Jake, is right, because the majority of the part of the solution will come from inside of Palestine. It has to come from inside of Palestine in order for it to be a legitimate and long-lasting peace and a right resolution, in order also to guarantee the right of return for those Palestinian refugees. What we can do here is support Palestinians living inside. Us as a diaspora, as an international solidarity movement, we can support Palestinians living inside. And there are amazing initiatives coming to us from the inside. I mentioned a couple of them earlier, but you have another organization called Falastiniyat. And this organization is basically highlighting all of what's happening and the different villages that were occupied, the different initiatives that we can see coming from inside of Palestine. So for that, we have to support Palestinians living inside And how we can support them is by adhering to their calls and by also making sure to magnify their voices here so that our rights as Palestinians in the diaspora and from the inside are being respected, and the international community isn't turning a blind eye.
If I may, Zahia, just respond
please,
to that as well. Thank you for this, and absolutely true. But I also would like to add and remind folks that the creation of the Palestinian Authority, or the PA as we know it today, is a creation of the colonial settler state of Israel. Creation and maintenance. So for Israel, if we go back to the Oslo Accords, in order for it to maintain its apartheid regime, a political elite, a Palestinian political elite, that then becomes an agent in a way or another to those policies and extension is necessary. And for the PA to exist and maintain the exact same way that it does today, that's essentially a creation of the Oslo Accord, but also the maintenance of it is in the interest of the Israeli colonial settler regime. Now, in terms of the Palestinians, as you mentioned, Zahia, our resistance to that is ongoing, and not just by Palestinians inside the West Bank and Gaza, but also by Palestinian refugees who collectively at many events and many occasions have called for the revival of the PLO, the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And we see today when we have people, elected officials, let's say, such as my mother, Khalida Jarrar, who stand also in opposition to the policies of the PA and the Palestinian Authority, what happens is they get either killed or imprisoned. And that also is in the interest of maintaining the Palestinian Authority to serve that political elite, as theorists and revolutionaries such as Frantz Fanon has written about in many examples from many colonial settler states have also implemented in many different places. So I just wanted to add that. That's a very good question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yafa. Our next question is from Don Goodwin Hammam. Was there another question, or is that the next question?
I don't think we have time for any more questions, Zahia. Let's go to our final, or I'm not sure if we have one or two more even, but our time is running out.
It's already 7.
I'll be real quick. I remember before I came to Canada, small island in Mauritius, just off the coast of Madagascar, South Africa. My grandfather told me about Palestine, very young, 5 years old, 6 years old, because the mosque would raise money for Palestinians. And, Palestine has been with me since I even knew what was happening in Palestine. And I'm going to share this one piece that I wrote, and it goes a little something like this. You in a Etobicoke dealership got your new keys to the whip, Supreme clothing, new fit, you got the drip, new house, mortgage payment, but you got a backyard, new clothes, new home, new you, new car. But across the world, these luxuries are a far cry. You got it all, but you ever think about Palestinian apartheid? You ever think if your backyard was an open-air prison? Walk down the street, just see murder, occupation, killing. The olive farms been getting bulldozed. The enemy never arrives by boat. He always arrives in limousines. So in solidarity, we rage against the machine. This is for Palestinians, unarmed with no face, just like a kafaya and a clenched, raised fist, raised. It's for my people who can't hide because they're in an open-air prison. Free my people, keep living. They'll never erase your existence.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. Just showing the importance of art as a form of resistance and solidarity. Thank you so much for that. I think I join my voice to Hammam's in order to thank all of the participants today. And it's very important for us to go through thanking you one by one. Haneen, thank you. Yafa Al-Jarrar, thank you. Layla Ali from Lebanon, thank you. Barry Weisler, thank you. Dirka Proud, thank you. Cheryl Nestle, thank you. Dave Bleakney, thank you. Badia Dweik, thank you. I thank you to Independent Jewish Voices, to Courage, and to the House of Palestine for allowing to have this rally today to show our solidarity.
Socialist action.
Oh,
And
yes.
to Socialist Action as well.
Socialist Action as well. Sorry for that mishap. For allowing us to have this rally to commemorate Nakba 72. And remember, let's keep on using that hashtag Nakba 72. And you have the petition, the link for the petition. Please go ahead, share it as much as you can, and sign it. And Badia, you mentioned something that I'm going to use for my wrap up, and then I'll turn it over to Hammam. You said resist to exist. And this is extremely powerful. And this is what Palestinians in the diaspora and across the world and on the inside continue to do every day, every day. Every act of existence is an act of resistance. So thank you so much for all of you who joined us on Zoom, joined us on Facebook. Please use the resources that we've put here in order to go and to learn more and to act more. Hammam, I turn it over to you.
Yes. Okay. Well, just wanted to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you so much for coming and for speaking from all of where you're at and during this pandemic. Palestinians, we are in an ongoing state of mourning. We lost our homeland, but we are also in an ongoing state of resilience and perseverance and endurance and resistance. We will continue to resist, and we will continue to advocate for our internationally recognized human rights, because this ongoing state of mourning and anxiety and grief, it's not going to go away. It only serves to empower us in order to attain our human rights, our internationally recognized human rights, starting with, first and foremost, the right of return. So thank you. Freedom, justice, and equality for all.
As we say in Arabic, بالعود إن شاء الله.
بالعود إن شاء الله.
Thank you all.